What type of rifle does the Minuteman need for SHTF? Well, if you ask the internet that question, you're probably going to get several different answers. Probably not based in reality, but based on personal bias, what type of rifle they have, who their favorite influencers, or how many YouTube videos they watch, and not many people actually consider a lot of very important variables when it comes to picking out a rifle for a particular role. And if you're a Minuteman, the most important asset you can have is other fellow Minutemen. And if that's the case, you should be in a group, and each one of you should have a very particular job and a particular role, and each one of you should have a weapon that matches that particular job and particular role. For this video, I'm using myself as an example. I'm not going to say you need this rifle or you need that rifle. I'm just going to tell you how I tailor a rifle for my particular role and my particular application. In this case, a Minuteman style rifle. So let's talk about that. The first thing I'm going to consider is location. I do live in Arizona in the Sonoran Desert in a small to medium-sized town that is completely surrounded by mountains on every single side. There's not a lot of flat open spaces here. It's heavily vegetated, and if you go up even a little bit in elevation, suddenly you're not even in the desert anymore. So that's something I do want to consider because it could be urban warfare, it could be fighting in mountainous terrains, and it needs to be able to adapt to those different styles of fighting. It could be a 3-yard shot, a 30-yard shot, or a 300-yard shot. So I need more of a broad kind of general purpose rifle. Threat level and potential threat is something you also want to consider. At this point, we can only speculate, but if we look at history, usually the person who can carry the most rounds comes out on top. And for me, you know which rifle I'm going to pick. And the nice thing about the AR platform is that it's literally a whole weapon system that can be configured in a variety of ways. So it's a very practical choice for most people here. Now let's talk a little bit about philosophy of use. What type of rifle would it be and how would I utilize it? Well, I think for this location and application, a medium range carbine would be ideal. So be able to reach out effectively to at least 300 yards, push out to 4 or 5. It doesn't have to be a precision rifle, but at least hit a man-sized target out that far. But remember, I do live in and around an urban area, so I don't want to lose too much of my close quarters capability. I want it to be kind of okay at doing a little bit of everything, but I don't want a specialty rifle. Let's look at these rifles. In my opinion, the two most important things on rifles, just like these, are going to be the length of the barrel and the optic which sits on top. The length of the barrel will determine the capability and the lethality of the rifle itself. So, velocity, energy, fragmentation, lethality, flatter trajectory, and the optic will determine the capability as well as lethality of the operator. So these two things need to work together. You don't want to have an optic which outclasses the rifle or vice versa. And I'm not saying you have to have magnification, but it needs to be tailored for that specific application so that operator can use it to its fullest extent. Let's talk a little bit about optics really quick, then we'll get into the rifles. Some people consider LPVO as a fad. Personally, I do not consider LPVO as a fad. I consider the way people utilize them a fad. And I have been critical of them in the past. That does not mean I don't own LPVOs or don't use them or would not use them in certain applications. I just think the way people utilize them is wrong. A lot of people that put on top a very heavy LPVO, a heavy mount, then they'll offset or piggyback a reflex sight, or in some cases an entire red dot. And by the time they're done, they literally could have 2.5 pounds of optic on top of their rifle. And most people, they only use that reflex sight or that red dot. They never use the LPVO, and their whole justification for having it is if the time came down, at least I can ID a target. And I think that's the wrong idea. Barrel length is also something that people don't consider enough. Yes, I love a 10.3 or an 11.5 as much as the next guy, but realistically, in a Minuteman SHTF role, a longer barrel length would probably be the best thing. Remember, you probably will not have access to a lot of Gucci ammunition, and even if you have a huge stash of 77 grain OTM, how much can you actually carry on your person at once? And is it realistic that you can go home every single day and resupply on that ammunition? So realistically, a 16-inch barrel or 14.5 could easily take a range projectile and turn it into something that's actually lethal. So a 16-inch barrel or 14.5 would be my personal choice. Let's look at this rifle first, starting off with the optic. This is the NightForce NX8 1-8 LPVO. Unity Tactical Fast LPVO mount. There's going to be both pros and cons with a mount this tall. Cons are going to be height over bore, so you do want to compensate with your holdovers and even with your zero. Next con will be if you spread out prone, naturally gravity wants to kind of push your face or your whole head downward into the buttstock. So you do have to maintain kind of a chin well, which is doable. Some people just find it uncomfortable. The pros are going to be promoting a nice heads-up shooting position, which I really like, especially when you're standing up shooting, moving while shooting, maneuvering, bracing yourself to stabilize your shot, and even taking cover and trying to move and shoot behind cover. So it does help out with some things, which I do like. The 1x capability of this is actually pretty good. Could be better for how much it costs, but there are LPVOs out there that are a lot worse. But it does have a very, very bright reticle. It does have an etch reticle too, so you don't even have to turn it on if you don't want to. It's still usable without the reticle on. It does have a first focal plane reticle, so regardless where you are on magnification, your BDC will always hold true. And that's important because 8x magnification is actually a lot, so in some situations you may only want like 3 or 4x, have like an ACOG level of magnification. And with the first focal plane reticle, your BDC is always on point. Another thing I like about this is it's pretty lightweight. Together with the mount, it's a pound and a half exactly, if I remember right, and it's 9 inches long or something like that, so it's pretty compact and pretty lightweight by LPVO standards. Moving on, I do have flip-up iron sights on here just for redundancy because this does have an etched reticle. And for me to actually use these iron sights, this thing would have to be so badly damaged that I couldn't even use the etched reticle anymore. If you notice, my front sight is halfway down the route, not in the normal position. And that's because I'm giving priority to this IR device because this thing turns my 12-hour rifle into a 24-hour weapon system. So it's definitely a lot more important than a backup front iron sight. Night vision capability will be a huge asset and tactical advantage to any Minuteman and his rifle. You can easily hit man-sized targets out a couple hundred yards with an IR laser and a decent set of nods, and you can even be a problem to people who are even further out than that. I'm not saying that you're going to be a sniper, but you can easily gain fire superiority, suppress them, and maneuver on them, and be a huge problem. Every fighting rifle needs a weapon light, and this one is no exception. I just have my Streamlight ProTech HLX on this rifle. This actually has a higher candela output and longer throw than my Surefire, so I even put an air socket mount on here just to put it in a very convenient spot so I can utilize that tail cap right there. And if you notice, I do have a vertical foregrip right here about halfway down the rail right here. So that allows me to maneuver the front end of the rifle a lot more easily and gain leverage and brace so I can use the tail cap and the pressure pad. In my opinion, a vertical foregrip is almost mandatory on a fighting rifle. A couple of other things on this rifle to help out with low light or no light shooting under night vision is going to be a Geisley Maritime Bolt Catch. It's pretty hard to miss this even in the dark. A ambi safety with a long throw lever, and also a pressure pad for your laser. All the D-balls have small buttons on top, and even under nods in some conditions, it's pretty hard to see, or it could be out of focus. So for a D-ball, I do like to have a pressure pad for that IR laser. It is actually possible to shoot passively with a nod through the NX8. It does get decent light transmission, and I have the spot on the diopter marked so I know exactly where I need to turn it when I want to set it for passive night vision shooting. I'm not saying it's the best aiming method, but it is possible if you don't want to put out an IR signature or you just want to scope out the general area. One other thing I want to point out on this rifle is since it is a little bit heavy with the LPVO, the mount, and the laser, I've actually slung it a little bit differently than I normally do like on the other rifle. I have slung it to the furthest end of the rifle that I can actually reach, and that's so this sling can have more leverage over the rifle itself, and that actually lets me put forth less effort when I'm slinging this thing over my body, carrying it, and maneuvering it. And I've also taken off the QD swivels, and that's also because it's heavier, and I've seen those things wear out. So I just pigtailed it directly through the stock and through this Magpul paraclip attachment point that is actually screwed into the rail itself. So it's very secure, and I don't have that QD rattle anymore. Now let's take a look at this rifle. when would it be beneficial, or who would it be beneficial to use a rifle like this? Like I said, if you're working with other people, which you definitely should, it would be beneficial if you guys can use, different configurations. I'm not saying every single rifle has to be different, but it would be beneficial if some people had LPVOs, maybe some people had red dots, and maybe some people had even more magnification. So let's go over a rifle like this. When would you want to choose a red dot over an LPVO? Well, of course, the closer you get in terms of engagement distance, that's when the red dot really starts to look appealing. You don't have to put up with things to an extent like parallax, scope shadow, eye relief, and your red dot is usually a little bit faster once you get close up. Plus, it is lighter. That weighs 1.5 pounds on its own. Forgot how much this thing weighs, but I know it's not 1.5 pounds. So there is the weight factor to it, because without accessories, this rifle is actually a little bit lighter, but with accessories, that rifle becomes heavier. So even 0.5 pound or 0.75 pound total really makes a difference when you're carrying this thing around all day long and trying to maneuver it. So there is the factor of weight. Night vision capabilities of this Aimpoint Comp 4 are decent. Gets good light transmission. The reticle looks nice and crisp and fine under night vision. So it is a very good passive aiming optic for nods. Since the Aimpoint Comp 4 is entirely dependent on batteries to run, of course I'm going to have backup iron sights. In this case, I do have the metal Magpul Pro iron sights. I do love these things because they're compact and they basically take up no rail space when compared to the Troy sights, which look gigantic when you look at them next to these. So I do like those, and I just flip them up and use them if I needed to. I do have the front one in the same position because I'm also giving priority to this IR device and this pressure pad. Because this is more beneficial, it's more important, and it does take my 12-hour rifle and literally turn it into a 24-hour weapon system. One other thing to talk about is this rifle and optic will be better for shooting with night vision. You got to remember, you may not always want to use your IR laser because anyone with night vision can see your IR signature and can easily engage you. And it's a lot more practical to shoot passively with the Aimpoint than it is with that LPVO. One thing I love about this rifle is the balance. The balancing point is actually right in the middle exactly, which really helps out when you're trying to maneuver this rifle, especially quickly. And if I was in an urban area, I would definitely take this rifle over the other. What I like about this rifle is that it's pretty well rounded. It does have a decent LPVO on top. And since this rifle is naturally pretty lightweight, it does carry the weight of the LPVO and the mount very nicely. Also, 1x capability of this NX8 is decent, and the higher mount makes that 1x shooting a little bit more intuitive. The only reason I would put on an offset RMR or a piggybacked RMR on this rifle would be for passive night vision shooting. Other than that, anytime I would be going outside of an urban area, I would definitely take this rifle, and even sometimes inside an urban area, I would take this rifle. Remember, there are a lot of things you want to consider when you're trying to set up a weapon system for a particular application, i.e. a Minuteman or SHTF rifle. So your weapon system is going to be relative to yourself and yourself only. And the real asset is going to be other like-minded individuals when the time actually comes. That's going to be it for the video. I thank all of you guys who have stuck around to the end. I'll see you guys in the next one.